In fact, one thing you should definitely remember is that this fantasy world is in your own head. In reality, you're only typing words on a computer screen. Just keep telling yourself that. No doubt in your mind.
So yeah, welcome everyone to the Internet Real Life series, where we're exploring emerging philosophy of Internet realism. In our first session 2 weeks ago, we examined the dialectic of Internet optimism and Internet pessimism and Internet realism, sketching out a rough philosophy of the latter. And last week we were joined by J-Reg from Toronto's CCCRU, who discussed post-internet scenes and the art of scene making. And today we'll be talking about online culture. And in a moment, I'll tag in my co-host, Katherine Dee, who will introduce today's guest. And today's session will be similar to the previous weeks. First hour will be a recorded Q&A. And if you have questions anytime, ideally put them in the chat, in the chat box, or raise your emoji hand. And the second hour will be a non-recorded group exercise. So that being said, I'll take Kat back in and she'll introduce our guest today.
All right, so our guest today is Ruby Justice Thelot. He is one of my favorite thinkers and writers. If you follow me, you may already be familiar with him. I've been a guest on his podcast, and he's been a guest on mine. And he does some really interesting comment on tech and the internet, not just through writing, but through art and through video. And yeah, today we are going to be talking about the content creator as folk artist and what role AI may play in that.
Yeah, apologies for my delay. I was having a hard time finding a room in this WeWork, but it was all good in the end. Everybody can hear me okay? Awesome. So the following is essentially the product of a long period of meditation on what it means to make content and how this has become a niche activity and now perhaps the most popular activity for the next generation. One of the things that sparked my interest, of course, is the latest fandom report by YouTube. In their report that they do with the Geiger Institute, YouTube mentions that 65% of teenagers, of young people, want to be creators, right? This big word, the creator word. And I was like, what does this mean to be a creator? What was once astronaut, fireman, or superstar has now been subsumed into this great category of creator. This convergence towards a specific future job for this generation, the specific ages 14 to 24 as a part of the survey, led me to believe that maybe this was the top. This was the top of the creator, potentially its upcoming end. Now, what is the content creator, right? We're talking about an individual usually making content about whatever they're into, cars, photography, music, philosophy, Taylor Swift, Nicki Minaj, rap analysis, analysis of popular books, anything you could potentially imagine, right? And this was really bolstered in the 2000s by the rise of platforms that allowed the dissemination of essentially interest-focused groups, what some may actually call groups of practice, right? They're focused on a specific, like knitting, quilting, sewing, clothes making, making your own kombucha, so on and so forth, right? If you're on TikTok, you kind of know the wide range of what these groups of practice, communities of practice may do. Now, there were communities of practice. What I think the content creator allowed was the communities of content, right? There's not a specific practice behind what they were doing, i.e. they were not knitting, rather they were consuming a specific type of content. And so you had groups around like the Real Housewives of New York, groups around a show like Game of Thrones, groups around things like video games as well. And the thing that was happening here is essentially like these multi-layered shifts. On the one hand, infrastructurally, you have the possibility to find a community of practice or a community of content, start either talking or writing or making vlogs about that content. At the same time, you have this notion of the attention economy, which is that we have 24 hours in a day and they're being competed away by the different platforms we are on. And that what once was time for leisurely activities outside and like a very Robert Putnam bowling alone is now slowly being subsumed by spending time online. And so you have this current, you have the current of the dissemination, and you also have a third current, which is the current of creation. When we talk about the current of creation, what do I mean? I mean the ability to now easily create content or work around the things that you are interested in. That means that blogs are now easier to create. That means that videos are not easier to create and both produce. Movie maker is like such a big deal, right? If you are into music, the ability to make a song on GarageBand, if you're in the community of practice, reduces your barrier to entry into the creative field and allows you to participate. And so it is in this very unique environment that the content creator emerges as this crowd-facing presence, right? Always facing the screen, staring at the feedback that is integral to the very interface through which the content is distributed. For instance, when you see a video on YouTube, you see the content itself, but also you see the likes, the comments, and all these are in the same interface, meaning they exist as a singular cybernetic system, and all these different portions reinforce each other. It has been a hot debate whether or not content creators are artists. My idea behind this is that actually, yes, content creators are artists, but a very specific kind of artist. Specifically, they are folk artists, which means an individual creating art that is reflecting a particular culture, society, or community. What I mean in this specific scenario is that when a content creator is either in their community of practice or community of content, they reflect the idiosyncratic particularities of that digital niche that they inhabit. When people make content about Taylor Swift, they speak directly to the fandom and they rely on the references that are usually opaque to people outside of that community, that are people who are not initiated to the lore. Something that like Ali Sheehan, who's one of the top Taylor Swift creators, she has about over 200K subscribers on YouTube, talks about, she has devoted her effort to the analysis of Taylor Swift's lyrics. She has video essays about her music, tutorials on how to make your own friendship bracelets. And 2 centuries ago, essentially, when the thing we call folk art was a bit more popular, this would have been essentially what we call tangible folk art, i.e. the creation of bracelets and artifacts that reflect one's community, and intangible in the analysis of stories and sort of the oral transmission of tales, right? And so we have both tangible and intangible folk art being recuperated, but also disseminated through what we now call content creation. And for many creators, this craft of content is like a devotional act, right? It is something they do out of the goodness of their heart, right? In their own precious time, they're making content for little or no compensation. In many ways, they exist outside of like financial incentives. There are social incentives for sure. But for the most part, there is a short tail of people who are making a lot of money, of course, but the long tail of people are just, you're not getting enough views to make any money or to monetize on YouTube. Simon J. Bronner, who's an American folklorist and historian, mentions actually in his essay, Folk Objects, that the notion of folk objects actually tends to emphasize the handmade over the machine manufactured. And this is another thing that sort of struck me, right? I was like, okay, wait, handmade over machine manufactured. This was the turn, right, between folk objects and mass-made objects in the first industrial revolution. Now, what is happening here is that in the realm of content, fan-made or non-corporate made content is, I think, this notion of handmade, this notion of authenticity. It's content created authentically by people for a community and not for profit. And we have, with the advent of AI, the fourth industrial revolution, the potential for another subversion of our current or contemporary understanding of folk art in the context of content creation, because I think we are approaching this idea of the machine manufactured, or to use a better term, machine generated fan content. And so the Industrial Revolution led to a shift from objects that were made by hand to some that were mass produced, but also democratized access to materials and tools in the process. And this is when I was talking about those three layers, right? The same thing here, where the barriers to entry, the barriers to creation have been reduced. We see a similar movement or a similar motion with content creators, namely that we have technological innovations bolstered by a number of creators, right? We have open access distribution platforms, we have the newsletters, we have potentially the if we're lucky, the stroke of luck to go viral and to be seen by millions of viewers. Now, one of the things that's interesting to me, so the lowering of barrier to creation has led to unfortunate perverse incentives for individuals trying to gain the attention economy, right? That second layer I was mentioning here. This is something that Matt Klein talks about in his zine Audience Capture, where he explains the dynamics at play on platforms where creators are so clearly aware of the performance of their work through metrics, right? So when we think about that sort of cybernetic whole, right, we think about you're making your video, but you're directly seeing on YouTube what the response is, how people are responding to it, the comparison between your content and other content. And you're made aware of what the audience thinks in ways that are somewhat visible in other mediums. Like maybe you'll read a magazine review of your art show, or like a paper review of your movie. But I think that's made super salient online by the speed of that feedback. And this focus on metrics can push creators away from authentic expression, which is a crucial attribute for folk art, towards instead content optimized for algorithmic success, often at the expense of originality and sincerity. And so the term audience capture that Klein uses is used to denote the slow and progressive drift towards popular content that appeases the audience. And here, I think, is where the impact of AI can be severe, because in a struggle with algorithmic machines to capture an audience attention, creators are pushed to optimize the content in detriment of that authenticity, and in service of the machines or of the algorithms. So when I think about all the different tools that people may use, right, whether it is like A/B testing, or if you are on YouTube now, you know that you can post different thumbnails essentially to see which one works best. These are all integrated in the tool to make you want to optimize your content. And if you watch Mr. Beast, those videos all have the same kind of thumbnail, right? That face with that, like, you know, like it's always the same kind of format. And that is because that format, the face with the strong expression, just works and is loved by the algorithm, right? It is favored by the algorithm. And so people start making content like that. And so because new technological developments do not occur in a vacuum or in a perfect creative economy, the existing dynamics that dictate the path of technology still apply here. In this case, when we think about AI being deployed, we think about the possibility for essentially at-scale testing of what can be optimized. We can already see that we have a tilted winner-take-all, almost like more than Pareto creative market that favors dopamine engendering content. And so the growing preference for AI-produced content is reminiscent of how mass-produced objects slowly replace handmade ones in the first industrial revolution. You can already see this on Facebook. One may claim, of course, that there will be new opportunities in the wake of this displacement, but there is little evidence to substantiate that claim. And if history is to be repeated, the outlook is grim. By and large, local folk artists during the first industrial revolution migrated to urban centers where jobs were abundant, but working conditions were poor. Those who maintained their practice managed to do so by moving their goods upmarket and cultivating a more niche and upscale clientele. This meant that the public was relegated to the consumption of mass-produced goods, while folk art became essentially a luxury. And you kind of still see this now. Like if you go to an artisan to get like a custom leather-made bag or something, this is something that you're paying more than what you would pay at Zara. It is likely that this will become the position of digital folk art, the community-driven creations emerging from internet subcultures, reflecting the values and aesthetics of specific digital communities. In response to the growing volume of AI-generated content, the quaintness of authentic user-generated content, specifically content by users, will provoke a revival, what McLuhan would call a reversal. User-generated content will be a form of resistance, like the vinyl record in the age of the MP3 or the film camera in the age of the iPhone. To combat the impact of generative AI, creators will need to nurture a closer relationship with their consumers, moving away from mass platforms to smaller digital spaces more tailored to their communities. And we see this with Discord, the Stoa itself, right? This is like one of these like dark forests, that's something that the Dark Forest Collective uses as a term. And this is really this attempt at secluding the content or the folk art from the pressures of optimization in service now of the audience rather than of the algorithms. It is in those private spaces, away from the ruthlessly optimizing algorithms, that new publics will be formed. Though AI lowers the barrier to creation, it now also lowers the barrier to senseless hyper-optimization. When the folk artist plays to a crowd of computers, the work no longer serves as a narrative ingrained in a specific culture. Instead, the work becomes subservient to metrics it exists to be optimized, to be legible by an ever-changing algorithm. In the chase to satisfy the algorithm, the logical progression dictates that content be created en masse to test out the best performing. By choosing algorithmically driven platforms, creators expose themselves to their physics, to use the little intern Carolyn Busta term of like the physics of media here. As Fran Lebowitz reminds us, culture is a two-way street, and a discerning audience makes the culture better. Culture is a two-way street, and a discerning audience makes the culture better. The juxtaposition of the feeds and algorithms and generative AI decenters the wants of the human audience in favor of the algorithmically driven metrics. Creators will need to find new alternatives if they want to survive. Otherwise, the content creator will be a folk artist doomed to play endlessly to an audience of accelerating computers. That is the content creator as folk artist. It is a brand new essay that is currently in Art News, and it's been really, really great to work on this and research this, because I think it sort of does the thing that I love to do, which is bring in kind of very separate fields and specifically digital culture and look at it from a very historical lens and see if we can sort of draw parallels. iPhone asks, don't all media have algorithms, machine or no? There is curation, not necessarily algorithm. That's kind of a different thing. So some of them have algorithms, but not necessarily. Curation is not an algorithm. I think is a kind of a different thing in this context.
That was coming up for me, and then I'll open it up to Q&A for the audience shortly is, do algorithms create their own cultures, right? Like, how is it determined, like, what performs? That can't be determined in a vacuum, right?
Well, the thing is, I did the thing that I don't like when people do, which is talk about the algorithm as this thing that we have no involvement with, right? I think it is much more. I don't like the algorithm is making us, listen to only Sabrina Carpenter, and we can't. Boo! I'm a victim of the algorithm. No, no, no. We are agents. We have agency. We can break out. Like, I can go to a record store and buy something something that nobody's ever heard of. I can do that. I can go on Spotify and write in random letters and see what pops up and listen to that, right? There are many ways I can escape recommendation. What I mean to say is that in this waltz, in this samba that we dance with the algorithm is leading the steps, meaning recommendations are extremely convenient. The feed is a design that presents us things in an order, and we like to follow that order. It does not mean that we cannot scroll to the bottom and find the thing that was not meant to be shown, or that was meant to be shown last. It is just that as we dance, we follow the steps along. We can push back, but I see it more as this like symbiosis, synergetical, almost that kind of cybernetic system more than a singular imposing algorithm. But in that dance,
there's different algorithms too, right? Platform specific, and then each person within the platform. I guess I'm curious if you would consider the relationship with the creator in this recommendation system as creating its own cultural flavor that can be gamed. Like, is there a way to sort of both follow the algorithm and then sort of create your own winks and nods and eccentricities while also being in this system? I don't know if that question makes any sense. And then after that, I'd love to bring Peter in.
Yeah, the great Melanie Clemens, the professor at SMU, has this project called Poisoning My Cookies, whereby she intentionally essentially diverts a lot of the she like goes on websites intentionally. I think in her performance piece, she starts Googling and reading about surveillance capitalism, so she gets ads about surveillance capitalism. So she directly informs this cybernetic cycle, right, by inputting a lot of things that she wants to see, and then it starts showing her things about surveillance capitalism. So these are all things that, because we're people with agency, we can do. I can write jazz in Google and like watch more jazz videos if I want to see more jazz, for instance. But it takes wanting to lead that waltz.
Peter, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I have a few questions. Thanks, Kat, and thanks, Ruby, for coming. The German philosopher Hans Müller came to the Stoa last year, and he has some cool thoughts on people's public personas or their online personas, and he distinguishes between what he calls pro-felicity and then genuine pretending. Where the former refers to a persona as aimed at enhancing one's profile, while the latter is more of a self-aware performance. And I interpret that this pro-felicity involves like using one's persona or one's second self, as Sherry Turkle calls it, as in like an instrumental way, like leveraging it for some benefit, to sell something, to gain attention, achieve status, where genuine pretending, on the other hand, kind of involves one second self as like performance art. So it's not just the artifacts that they're creating, whether it's a video or article, it's considered art. It's like the persona itself is art. So I'm wondering what you think of this idea of not just treating one's content as art, but treating one's second self as art, as a way to being doomed to being captured by the algorithm, which is related to, I think, to what you're talking about, this authentic expression.
Yeah, and I think by authentic, it is a loaded word, right? what I mean in this is that it is really authenticity in this context means directed towards the needs or the mores of a community. It means in the context of folk art is that you're making the beaded bracelet. Like think about your if you go to some Tucson, Arizona, and they have like their pottery, you're making the pottery in the form and in the shape of that specific community, because those are the mores and those are the aesthetic traditions that you've learned, that you follow. In that sense, that is in this context, like the desire for authenticity is related to the position and ingrainment in that community, and also making it following that existing system of beliefs. And with regards to the profilicity, I like that concept a lot. I'd have to think about it more. Like there's a lot of wealth here, I think, in the idea of the second self, and whether or not that can be controlled. Like if that is presented on an algorithmically driven platform, how does one sort of present, and how does one try to control that? I'd have to think about that more, but there's definitely something there.
Because I know like the people who I admire, like the online people I admire most, like Kat, Venkatesh, Josh, yourself. It's like there's like an artfulness to the way that they show up online. It's like they're not just trying to win the game of the attention economy, which I think has something to do with like treating their second self, or having a certain artistic awareness of it.
That's very interesting. I'm Kat. I feel like you're probably better at this than I am. So how do you see it? How do you think about this?
I don't really know. That's the thing. I think the algorithm can become sort of a language. Like it doesn't, I don't think it has to be, it does constrain, but I think it can constrain in very particular ways. But then I'm as I say this, I second guess myself, and I'm like, is there like, am I misunderstanding how it works?
I think for me, like the big unlock, and this has nothing to do with folk art, but it's like and this is probably why it's dangerous for teenagers. Like the more I felt secure in other parts of my life, the more I could be playful online, because the more I could decouple those second selves. Having like a good, like a corporate job, whatever, where like you play the game and you have to like, talk to Jenna from accounting, and that's like your life from 9 to 5, really sort of is a good counterweight to Instagram in some ways. If that is like not a theory at all. This is just like a practical insight that I think I've gathered.
Also depends how you use social media,
Yeah.
right? Some people use it to connect. Some people use it to explore. I think there's different types of users. Some people project to, I mean, and I think it's a conscious choice for a lot of them. They try to, it's how they type is how they speak. Whereas some people are playing a character. And sometimes it's to be in the right group chat, sometimes it's for engagement. And then I think there's like a third sort of a hybrid group. And the one thing I will say is I think it's much more conscious than people think it is. I think it is largely a choice on how you show up in that way. Do other people have any questions, or what? Does anyone want to jump in? You could use the emoji hand, or I think we might be a calm enough group where I can sort of just trust folks to start speaking, and then I'll moderate as necessary.
Okay, I'll try. So I design these sorts of algorithms, right? I'm like an AI engineer. And one thing that I think is missing from the conversation about algorithms is kind of like what you try and do as an engineer. So not only can you tune the algorithm in the way you interact with it, but there's a lot of like choices that can be made about what you surface and what it is to recommend things to someone, and like kind of what those design choices are. I think there's a tendency to think of this as like we are subject to this like vast power of capital that we can kind of like influence one way or another, but there's also like simply design choices to be made. And I'm kind of curious what you have to say about that, if you've explored that at all. Like, what is it to design something that's like germane to human flourishing, for lack of a better term? And like also kind of what is that? It, rather than a cybernetic system, it's much more there's much more influence, right? So as somebody designing it, like when I see user behavior that is good and seems like good for it's like you can design it to encourage it, and I want to, right? That some of it is just like a matter of scope and like what you can see as from the end, like what metrics are available to you. And then the second part, which is more on authenticity, it's like, isn't the person who designs the bracelet, creates the bracelet in Arizona, still just doing it to like chase clout, just in like a different scope? But the first question is one I'm much more interested in.
Yeah. The person in Arizona chasing clout by making the bracelet. I would say no, like if you live in Santa Fe and you're making pottery in that town with the folks around there, there's like maybe local clout in the sense that like every society or microcosm has like a hierarchy or whatnot. That's just like a part of being in a community. I think it has the work is directed at the people who are going to be using it. This folk art analogy definitely breaks down in the global world, right? We are a few industrial revolutions, a little too far from like the classic traditional understanding of folk art, but like like weaving stories into a quilt, like our stories are told in different ways now, but it doesn't seem so cloud focused. Now, it's funny because part of what my students are doing right now is they are designing their own algorithms, and they get to sort of optimize essentially for what they want, right? And that's very interesting to me because you essentially get to see what people favor because we have limitations in like what they can do. So if we're doing like an image identifier, are they focusing on like identifying faces? Are they focusing on identifying plants? Or what is the thing that they want to essentially expand their limited compute resources to do? And also just what kind of experiences they're trying to build, right? And so I don't know what it looks like at like a Facebook level where you have the pretense of neutrality, or like you're trying like either like a open worldview or a attempt at neutrality. Mostly to give you some context of my work, like my like daytime job is we're using algorithms specifically for like these like very heavy pricing models where the optimization essentially is like, is the price correct? And like, what is the difference? The loss is like the difference between the price and the correct price and the price that we've predicted. So it's much easier in my day-to-day work to do that than to say recommend song, where like it's a little more, but I'm sure they have ways of finding that out, right? Time listened to or whatnot. Yeah, I think so. So to come back to answer your question, the craft of the reward function or of your loss optimization is like essentially an art, because you have these parameters you're trying to get to that are essentially proxies for desire, like appreciation, and it is just like it is almost like trying to capture the wind. Like it is very artful.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I think I experience it as that. I wonder if it's in a way, so you talk about the creation of folk art as like being responsive to the mores of the community. I wonder if there is such a thing that has yet to be created, that I've seen kind of present in your work. I followed it through Cat, or like glimmers of it, is like, what is it to build something like a recommendation algorithm that takes the mores of the people that it's engaging with into account, and that's, I think, so I think it's something that's like very under researched, but is like a very deep and powerful question, given how diaphanous it is to even capture signal at all.
Yeah, I am my self-interested belief is perhaps that work on a small scale should be done by humans, but I know it's not scalable, right? Which is the big issue with trying to build technology solutions, the scalability. Yeah, it's just, yeah.
Liza had a question. Would you like to ask it, or I could read it from the chat if you like?
Hold on, I asked a few different ones. Which question were you looking at specifically?
I mean, whichever question you want to ask. I just want to make sure no one
Oh
gets
yeah.
lost in
I
the.
guess I was kind of curious about, we kind of talk about the algorithm as like this amorphous thing that decides what we look at or not. But I think algorithms sort of are created based on how we interact with the content, and like it chooses what to put forward to us based on what we tend to choose. Like it models itself after us. And like, is it almost like our fault, or our, like this like high dopamine, this like content that sometimes seems like more surface level, like is it almost like our own creation that we're like manifesting, the algorithm to be built this way, to not value, more thoughtful, perhaps more slow, uh something that you need to like kind of chew on to understand. uh, that's kind of like a question, that a topic that I wanted to bring up for you.
I go back and forth on this. It's the idea of the waltz, right? Like who is leading the waltz? So the usual answer number one, the simplistic is like the machine is in charge and we are just the subjects. The answer number two, which you'll hear, the more nuanced one, is, well, we have agency, but the machine is essentially showing a salad in McDonald's to a group of teenagers and they're choosing McDonald's. And so that's like answer number two, which is we're presented with two choices. One of them is easier, and so we choose that. Or one of them feels better on a short term, and we are unable, because of our limited intellectual capabilities as humans, to foresee what it does when we choose the easy solution, or the easy cultural choice, like the pop music, instead of the more complex experimental song over and over again. And then there's a third option, which is that actually the algorithm is a preference revealer, i.e., if we did not have the cultural stigma associated perhaps with listening to pop music, then this is all we would listen to it, and now it just confirms it confirms that this is the actual thing that people like. And I've explored all three, and I think about them, and I vacillate, and I don't know is my answer. But I think all three are very interesting. Number one less, but number two and three I think about a lot. I know that's not an answer. I'm just saying that I've thought about this. I just don't know. What do you think? Do you think that it is our own preferences being revealed? Or do you think that we are unable, that presented in any situation between a Big Mac and a salad from Sweet Green, we pick the Big Mac and we're just like, it just tastes better. And then we just do that. Or that the truth is that actually all along, all we wanted was the Big Mac and we were eating the salad because we felt shamed.
I think, okay, I don't have like a fully formed answer on it, but I think my gut thought would be like it depends on like the individual's like environment growing up and sort of their own internal values. Like if they grew up like eating salads and like their whole like the people around them valued like eating naturally and like that's all that they would talk about all the time, then they would probably go into McDonald's and choose the salad because that's what's natural to them. And maybe like there is if we wanted something to change, I think it would be have to be at that level where like the values in which like we bring people up is like not being so focused on like easy solutions or like high dopamine things. And we've also been talking a lot about scenes like in the past, like in these like philosophical discussions. And I also think you like maybe like click on the experimental weird music more if you're just like in your real life more surrounded by like the scenes of like this like weird experimental music. So I think the more integrated with like interesting like um art in your physical life, the more that like kind of also reflects back into like the choices that you make within the algorithm. Like maybe like all the pop music just won't be to your taste because you've just like seen like the coolness of experimental jazz too much in your real life. But if you weren't exposed to that at all, then you might default to like all the generic answers, which like I think is like unfortunate.
Yeah, and you know what's very interesting about this is that I think my current stance has been that part of our job as educators and thinkers and writers and our role as an audience, actually, as audience members, is actually that is that of cultivating these new publics. I think I used the term in the essay, and that means that if we want more of something, we need to cultivate the listeners. I'm using music, but that applies to many things, right? We need to cultivate the future listeners of that thing. And that means sharing that music with your peers on a like word of mouth basis. That means organizing events where people can encounter that music, whether that be a dinner party or a full-on show. And I think in a world where potentially we believe that public institutions are failing at that mission, us as audience members must take the reins and now be the cultivators of these new publics, which is I think what you're kind of alluding to here, which is something that I've been toying with a lot.
I have to go off cam really quick, but before I do, I want to say we have a bunch of questions. Brandon, Monia, and then Hal, you all could jump in that order, and then Dizzy. So I don't want to exclude you. Dizzy, you could speak after Hal. I will be right back, everyone.
Brandon, feel free to go first.
Oh, yeah, I was just mentioning this idea of theory of mind because a lot of kind of evolutionary biologists pointed that in terms of a lot of our capacity to engage at a social level dramatically both increased our ability to coordinate. And then that kind of became this reinforcing feedback loop on the increase of the actual evolution of the brain to kind of be where we are now. And so much of that is kind of being able to model the other, right? Like I had, if I'm talking with Ruby or Peter, I've got some model of kind of how they're thinking about the conversation, how they're thinking about me, what they're trying to get out of it, the status that I'm trying to present, all the things that either subconsciously or consciously I'm kind of modeling, putting into that conversation in terms of what I ultimately want to get out of it. And when we're engaging online, we're kind of taking all of that same kind of mental framework, but we have no real model of the algorithm. I mean, we kind of do. We're kind of getting the sense like, yes, if I do a search, for X, I'm now all of a sudden going to get ads for X. But it's opaque in a way that we just kind of assume that it's following some of these same principles, but yet we have no real theory of what's actually happening behind the scenes. And I think like this notion of theory of algorithm in terms of like you could also kind of play with it with like a subsidiarity rule of algorithm where like yes, there's going to be some design decisions that are happening at higher levels of abstraction, but in terms of like some folk community kind of like modulating exactly how that algorithm manifests in a community level, giving them kind of autonomous tools to do that in a way that also kind of aligns with some of the broader general algorithmic goals that these design principles are playing with. So I think there's like just a lot of interesting things around some of those notions that, like, again, we kind of want to reduce algorithm to this big other that is spooky and opaque and kind of driving our behavior. But really, it's just it's a dynamic system where two things are modeling each other. And the more that we have kind of insights into effectively modeling that other, the better we're going to be able to engage with it in anything that we could describe as like a free relationship, right? Because that's what we want. We want a free relationship with the algorithm. We all kind of understand that algorithms are necessary, especially with any kind of like societal coordination at a planetary scale. Otherwise, it's just chaos, right? But insofar as possible, we want a free relationship with that algorithm so that we have some feel of autonomy, some feel of control, some feel of just not like sacrificing all agency as soon as we engage in these kind of planetary scale communities. So I just kind of adding these things to kind of add some complexity to the conversation, I think, and would certainly be interested in what Ruby thinks of that.
I really love the idea of a theory of, I wouldn't say mind, but a theory of algorithm in the same way that part of our job as both, I would say, users of AI and people who research the topic is to construct an understanding of it. And the field of like explainability, I think, is a very interesting one. We're trying to do that like from a more like micro or like technical level. But to understand how they function at a societal level, I think is very important. And I'm particularly concerned with the understanding, but also the communication of that understanding to the general public. Because one thing that I'm definitely wary of is just like when things feel opaque and the ways in which technology is made opaque and the ways in which that alienates the technology users from the thing that they're using. And so I think it would be great to understand why Spotify is showing you Sabrina Carpenter, why Netflix is showing you an Adam Sandler movie, so that you can understand. I think actually, to go back to the food analogy here, people understand why there's a McDonald's down the street, and it's better understood that they can actually go to a Chopped, a Dig, or a Sweet Green. That choice, I think, is a bit more obvious. The streets are not quite an algorithm, but they are a series of suggestions as to what you can do when you're walking down. As you make your gradient descent down the street, I think you can pick the optimal place to eat because you have a better understanding of what is the structure you're faced with. I think that there's a lot of opacity right now. And I think that if we were able to get that theory of mind of algorithm and then actually find a way to better communicate it, that'd be a big win, honestly. I like that idea a lot.
I'll just close with saying that like part of the problem is we don't desire that. Like we don't want the absolute freedom that the internet presents us with, right? Like that's kind of been our historical dilemma. And so like you're kind of very much fighting upstream on that.
I think I have time for one more question because I'm about to get kicked out of this room by the man who's sitting outside. So,
all right,
No problem.
Monia, you had a question.
Oh, I don't know if there's even an answer for this, but I just keep thinking like algorithms keep showing me things that I don't want. So I always wonder, like, isn't there some sort of, I don't know if this has been disproven, right? Or they all operate differently across all sites, right? Instagram probably doesn't operate the same way as YouTube and Spotify and all of that, but it'll be like, don't show me this. And suddenly it's like more of that comes up. And I'm like, I said, don't show me that. It almost seems like a counterintuitive thing. Yeah, I don't know. And YouTube seems to make you want to rely on the algorithm because the search function, I feel like I complain about this every chance I get, but the search function on YouTube is absolutely garbage. And you will search for something that you know is on YouTube and it won't show up, and it'll show you like weird body horror things instead. And you're like, what is this? And then the most like this song, and you're like, I'm not looking for anything that has anything to do with this. And then it makes you rely on, like, if you click into a video and then you see suggested things, it forces you to rely on the algorithm instead of allowing you to do things on your own. As well as I'm thinking of like having the option to see things chronologically or reverse chronologically, which you can do on Tumblr, but that's like the only place that you even have that option, essentially. Yeah, I don't know if there's an answer or to any of that. It's just,
I think that's a Jay Davids question, in the sense that that is a malfunction of the system, right? The system is attempting to show you something that you want to see, and it is failing at doing so. I think it is. That would be like, oh, it hasn't been tuned properly, or there's something about your queries that are not understood. And what's clear to me is that the reason why you'd want it to work is because they want to sell you ads and they want you to stay on the platform. So it is not in their best interest to be tricksters, right? And to show you body horror stuff, right? They want to keep you happy and engaged. And so in that sense, I think that that is essentially just a mistake.
Sorry, almost lost my voice there. Ruby, thanks so much for speaking with us. This was great.
I mean, this is amazing. There's so many like truly amazingly sharp and astute questions. Peter, I commend you for having cultivated such an amazing group of sharp and brilliant individuals. And Kat, as always, you know how how much I adore and revere your work. So I'm a fan, but I'm also very lucky to call you a collaborator and whatnot. So it's been a real pleasure. So thank you all very much.
Great, thanks. I think let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll do a group discussion.
All right. Thanks, Ruby. Take care.